Well, hello and welcome to Mystery Monday number one. We are back to Mystery Mondays again this year with a whole host of new stories. Number one is titled An Early Morning Murder at 13 Umberview. So, the question is, what does this look like and what are we doing and why do we have Mystery Mondays? It sort of begins and ends with our learning goal, our learning objective. What is it that we want to get out of this? We're not just doing assignments to do them and check the box and sort of quote unquote play school well. We want what we're doing to be valuable, to be the skills that we're learning to be transferable to real life. Um, and I firmly believe that these inferencing skills that we're going to work on, and I'll get into that in just a second, um, do that for us as far as, helping us build for the future. And I like the Mystery Mondays as the vehicle to get that done because most of the time they're entertaining. Throughout the story, if there are references that you may not know or that I think might need further explaining, I will try to do that while I read and sort of create an audiobook here. But so our learning goal for Mystery Monday now and in perpetuity is this: to cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support an analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text, including where the text leaves matters uncertain. So at the end of today's reading and questions and assignment here, you will be asked to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 4. That's kind of where you stand with your confidence in your ability to make those inferences. If you're at a 4, that means that you can draw inferences from the text and you're able to identify what evidence the author uses to prove his or her point and where the text leaves matters uncertain. You're also picking up on nuance like sarcasm and irony. A 3 means that you can draw inferences from the text, the evidence, and you're able to identify the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and you're able to point to where the text leaves matters uncertain. A 2 means that you're able to draw inferences from the text and point to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point. Now, notice how from a 4 to a 3 to a 2 to a 1, that a 4 is sort of exceptional. You're able to do a lot of things. Lots of brain moves are taking place to reach a 4. And as you kind of drop down to 3, 2, and 1, those brain moves become less and less involved. You'll notice here where, like, for example, the 2, you're not able to identify where the text leaves matters uncertain, but you can do these first couple of things, which is great. And that's kind of the goal. 3 is where we'd like every student to be. However, if you're not at a 3, that's okay. In fact, it's more important to tell me if you're not at a 3, say you're at a 2 or a 1, because then I can do things differently in my description of what this looks like to kind of help you understand a little bit better what it is that we are working on. And so finally, just kind of to wrap up, a 1 means that you are unsure of how to draw inferences from the text. And so what is an inference? Well, an inference is taking what we know in the story and being able to draw conclusions, make logical leaps based on what we know. So, for example, the questions in this I'm going to ask you about the story include, and number 2 is the best example of this. It includes, in the third paragraph of the last page, the author notes, without realizing it, and that's a sentence that we'll get to, what does that ask us to infer about Mrs. Van Now? So, there's going to be something that she does that isn't explicitly said. The text is leaving matters uncertain. What are we supposed to gather about her? And again, I'll point that out when we get to that point in the story. But that's kind of what an inference is. We are going to be, something will be made clear about Mrs. Van Now, and we have to make a logical leap about her character based on the thing that happens, but but the text doesn't say that she is that. For example, and this has nothing to do with the story, but I'm going to use it as an example. Let's say uh, the man had to duck to enter the room through the door frame. What is that? An inference we can make is that he's tall, right? What do we know? He had to duck. Well, an average sized person doesn't necessarily have to duck when walking through a door frame, right? But if a person had to duck walking through a door frame, an inference we can make is that that person is tall. That's that logical leap based on the information that we have. If you drive a car, you are making inferences every second of every moment that you are in that car, right? Um, we make those decisions constantly every in every sort of example of what it is that we do with our day. We're making inferences, and so we're going to practice that skill a lot here this year. Um, so let's get to our story. Police Constable Michael Caledon picked his way gingerly around the piles of gravel and dirt and dust-covered debris strewn about by the road repair crew. Buffing his black shoes to the proper wattage each morning was his least favorite activity, and he had no intention of wasting effort in his first call of the day. He parked the patrol car farther away than necessary for the same reason, to keep it clean. When the crew started up at, he looked at his watch, 7 o'clock, only 9 minutes away, there would be plenty of dirt and noise. He'd seen this bunch move in yesterday to rip up the street. So complete was his concentration that he found himself on the little flagstone walk at 13 Umberview before he realized it. That surprise, coupled with his sudden awareness that the old lady was sitting on the porch waiting for him, must have shown on his face. For Mrs. Van Now explained very sweetly, "I always have my coffee on the porch in this nice weather. Sometimes I even get out before the sun is over those trees. We'll have to go inside today, though. There's not much point in being out here when they start." She waved at the silent machinery on the street. "What do you take in your coffee, young man?" Michael used the 3 short strides up the walk to gather himself. "Good morning," he held out his hands. "I'm here to get—" "What do you take in your coffee? I have some muffins, too, that my neighbor made." Michael didn't drink coffee, but how could he say no to such a nice old lady? Just a half a cup, please, and milk. Lots of milk." That was how. "Excuse me, then. I'll be right back." Mrs. Van Now got up, shuffled over to the screen door, and went inside. Michael was having real trouble controlling his surprise. The lady was not behaving at all like a bereaved widow. 4 days earlier, in fact, just at this time, his watch now said 6:54, her husband had been shot in their bed. He was also surprised by how well she spoke. Mrs. Van Now was deaf, at least according to Sergeant Cosman. Michael had been sent because he was the best on the force at signing. So far, that skill had been entirely superfluous. His surprise was not diminished in the least when Mrs. Van Now came back up to the door saying, "No doubt you're wondering how we're able to communicate so easily. Well, I wasn't always deaf. Not until my accident 2 years ago. Here's your coffee, Constable. I can sign. Are you the one they said would come because you can sign?" "There's not much need. I'm pretty good at lips. You get good. You have to. Besides, everybody always says the same things to old ladies anyway." Her smile grew sweeter. Michael was so charmed, he was almost able to ignore the taste of coffee. "My other little trick." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Now don't tell anybody, Constable." Her smile grew wider and even more irresistible. "My other little trick is I do all the talking. People don't mind if old ladies prattle on, now do they? Now you want to know all about poor Alvin, don't you? I don't know why. I told those other nice policemen everything. Poor Alvin. We were only married 3 years, you see. He was my third husband." Without realizing it, and this is what I was talking about, that sentence in the question for what's assigned to you. Without realizing it, Michael bit into a second muffin. He didn't say a word as Mrs. Van Now continued. Without realizing it, Michael bit into a second muffin. What could that possibly tell us about Mrs. Van Nau? He didn't say a word, as Mrs. Van Nau continued. It happened when I was having my coffee here, just like this. It was a beautiful day. One of those extra special summer days, clear, quiet, warm. Of course, I couldn't hear the shot. Poor Alvin. With a raucous cough, the first day of the diesel engine started out on the street, followed by another, then a third, filling the air with a blend of aggressive clatter. The operators held the throttles open, not just to warm up their machines, but also to ensure that everyone in hearing distance would be awake to appreciate their efforts. Mrs. Van Nau winced. The early morning breeze had brought the exhaust fumes on the porch. "Come," she shouted over the din. "We'll go inside. Would you carry the muffins?" Michael picked up the plate and followed her. How, he thought to himself, how on earth am I going to tell Sergeant Cosman that such a sweet old lady is a liar? What has tipped Michael Callahan to the realization that Mrs. Van Nau may not be all that she pretends? Alright, I'd like to take this time, after reading the story, to talk about what we know. Well, one thing we know is that there is construction happening on the street. Number 2, Alvin is dead. By gunshot. And 3, Mrs. Van Nau is deaf. Given these things, there's a few few paragraphs of this story that I'd like to go back and reread. Everything you need to know will be in this section that I read right now. It's going to be your job to put together, number 1, the things we know, 2, with the information in this paragraph that is given to us, and you need to infer why Michael Callahan, of course, thinks that Mrs. Van Nau is a liar. That's the inference you're making. You're putting together what we know with what is not explicitly said to draw that conclusion, therefore making an inference. Now you want to know all about poor Alvin, don't you? I don't know why. I told those other nice policemen everything. Poor Alvin. We were only married 3 years, you see. He was my third husband. Without realizing it, Michael bit into a second muffin. He didn't say a word as Mrs. Van Nau continued. It happened while I was having my coffee here, just like this. They're on the porch. It was a beautiful day, one of those extra special summer days. Clear, quiet, warm. Of course I couldn't hear the shot, so poor Alvin, 'cause she's deaf. Now, this is sort of a reference to what's going on the street in front of him. With a raucous cough, the first of the diesel engines started out on the street, followed by another, then a third, filling the air with a blend of aggressive clatter. The operators held the throttles open, not just to warm up their machines, but also to ensure that everyone in hearing distance would be awake to appreciate their efforts. Mrs. Van Nau winced. The early morning breeze had brought the exhaust fumes on the porch. "Come," she shouted over the din. "We'll go inside. Would you carry the muffins?" So your questions are this. In the first few lines on page 2, Mrs. Van Nau greets Constable Callahan with a cheery tone. Given what we now know about the word bereaved, because it was a vocab word, what can we infer about her tone? Question number 2. In the third paragraph of the last page, the author writes, without realizing it, Michael Callahan had bitten into a second muffin. What does that ask us to infer about Mrs. Van Now? And finally, answer the following question. What has tipped Michael Caledon to the realization that Mrs. Van Now might not be all that she pretends? Here is your solution. A deaf person would not react to the ambient noise by raising her voice to compensate for it. Quite likely, Mrs. Van Now can hear, and if so, would find it difficult to explain why she did not hear the gunshot that killed poor Alvin while she was supposedly on the porch. And so now that we know the final solution, how might you change your answer to this question based on what you just wrote? What would you add that you didn't know before? What was new information in that final solution that you didn't have that maybe opened your eyes to something that you would like to add to your first answer? And now for the answer portion of today's video. If for the first question, in the first few lines on page 2, Mrs. Van Now greets Constable Caledon with a cheery tone, given what we know about the word bereaved, what can we infer about her tone? Well, bereaved means that she is widowed and should be grieving. But she is not grieving. She might be involved in the murder because she's not as broken up about this as we might expect her to be. Um, I'm drawing the conclusion that she might be involved in the murder. That's the logical leap I'm making based on the fact that number one, I'm bringing together the idea that bereaving means that she should be grieving and sort of sad over the fact that her husband is gone. And number two, the fact that she's not. I'm taking those two bits of information, putting them together, and making the logical leap that she might be involved in the murder because she's not grieving the way that she should be. In fact, she's almost cheery. So that is how you make an inference. In the third paragraph of the last page, the author notes that without realizing it, Constable Caledon was on to eating his second muffin. What does this ask us to infer about Mrs. Van Now? Well, it means that Constable Caledon is so captivated by her charming nature that he lost himself in her story. Because it's almost like he lost track of time. But he's not so lost in her story that he couldn't spot the obvious inconsistencies in her lack of deafness, I guess, that exists for her. We know that because she raised her voice over the din of the machines that started up that morning. And if you're deaf, you wouldn't be able to hear that. So, those are the answers that you should have. And whether you had all those answers, or you had some of those answers, or you didn't have those answers at all, that is going to speak to your rating on our learning scale. Are you at a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1? Thank you, and have a wonderful Monday. Once you finish this, you have earned your unit for the day.